Hey everyone, Packy here with another weather forecast discussion, recorded around 1 a.m. Eastern Time on Saturday, February 10th. And today we're going to be discussing severe weather coming up for the southern tier of the United States, as well as some winter weather potentially in Oklahoma and Texas, extending all the way up into the Northeast, where a major winter storm could occur, as well as a small area of potential flash flooding, maybe down in the deep south as well. So, before we get into that, however, I do want to go over what happened the other day on the 8th with some of the tornadoes we got out there. It was incredible footage I saw on Twitter of some nice tornadoes out here in Wisconsin, Illinois. That's where these reports are here. A nice string of reports from one cell that went through this area of Wisconsin, and then another cluster of cells that went through here, and then ended up in the Chicago region, kind of as what I had said in our last video. So even though that was a marginal risk, once again, marginal risk definitely produced, and there was even an EF2 tornado that was confirmed, this one up here in Wisconsin. And we do have some footage here from one of our chasers, shout out to Jacob, who captured some footage of an EF1 tornado. I believe it was the one here down to the south, as he was headed back to his home in Iowa. And pretty incredible footage. That was, didn't seem to look like it was touching down, but there was a tornado there. So, that also goes to show that even if there's not a condensed funnel down to the surface, you got to be aware, because tornadoes can be invisible. So that said, current weather we've got going on, as I had said, lots of winter weather coming up. We have tons of winter weather advisories throughout Nevada, Utah, got Wyoming covered, into Nebraska, and some of the areas actually in the plain states, the very western plains, kind of bordering the mountain range of California, the Front Range, and into some of the higher elevations of New Mexico, with some winter storm warnings down for the southern half of this area, covering much of New Mexico, and some watches further to the east, as these will probably be upgraded into warnings, as a lot of these areas might see quite a decent clip of snow. It's going to be tough because most of this is going to be driven by what is called dynamic cooling, which is essentially just, really heavy precipitation that falls, and it can kind of cool the air and the surface around it, and you can get some pretty heavy snowfall rates with this kind of weather. We've got also some dense fog advisories down in Louisiana, but not too much to talk about there. So severe weather we've got coming up tomorrow. When this video goes up, the way I'm seeing it now at 1 a.m., there is a slight risk here in parts of Texas, which basically just covers a significant hail risk. This may involve, a small tornado risk, small wind risk, but I really do think the hail risk is going to be the highest out of this one. Day 2, we have yet another slight risk. This is saying day 3 right now, but this will be day 2 when this is uploaded. We've got a little slight risk here in Louisiana, Texas, Mississippi, and this slight risk kind of encompasses more of a all hazards severe threat, where we might see definitely some tornadoes, some wind, and some hail, significant severe hail as well here in this area. And then we also have a day 4 risk here, covering parts of the very northern part of Florida here, covering Alabama, Georgia, and southern parts of South Carolina, for yet another significant risk for potentially some wind and hail, minor hail threat, but definitely some wind threat on the table here as the storms grow upscale and further to the east. And in addition to that, down in the southeast, we do have a slight risk and a marginal for excessive rainfall. Definitely some flooding on the table here as we move throughout, Saturday here. So as we move into model guidance for some of the severe threats we've got coming up, I'm going to cover those first, and then we'll get into the winter weather, and then the severe weather here first. We've got a very interesting setup for tomorrow, or as of recording this tomorrow, but today, what I find very interesting about this is showing dew points at the surface, which is, you think of it as your moisture at the surface, and some of the wind. What I find very interesting is watch how this area here in eastern or western Texas, we've got these 3 different areas. There's a small little boundary in here. This is going to be the Pacific front. You see that by the light color change in some of these dew points. You've got the polar front in here covering much of this area, and then this dry line in here that kind of builds back to the west as it gets forced westward with this fairly strong low pressure system forming, carrying lots of moisture back westward. And all of these boundaries on this particular model run, which is the HRRR, the high resolution rapid refresh, probably our best model to look at this far out for today's risk. Notice how these three areas, these three fronts here really, and thus when the HRRR initializes this moisture and the storms here, notice how quickly we get these first initial storms that run out ahead and run along that warm frontal boundary, and then we get this huge area of intense thunderstorms that just pop up straight and then grow to be fairly strong and discrete here, really in just a matter of 1 or 2 hours. And we get a large area of semi-discrete thunderstorms on this run, probably due to that. And that is a very interesting quirk here of the HRRR, as I know some of the other models, if we do a little comparison, the NAM just has a line here of thunderstorms forming along probably that Pacific front as it just moves off to the east. And maybe perhaps a second line, but that's kind of in the noise here on the NAM. I know the NAM has a little bit of a linear bias, so keep that in mind. But definitely some storms moving through the area tomorrow. This is going to be very late at night and kind of the after dark hours, so we're going to have to keep that in mind. And that is a little bit more of a hazard to life here. But I don't expect too high of a tornado threat. That shouldn't be much of an issue. And the hail threat, especially with that HRRR run, with a look like this, that hail threat is going to be pretty significant. And the tornado threat should remain low. The shear isn't particularly high, but especially we've got what's called a surface inversion in a lot of these regions, which is basically we've just got colder air near the surface and warmer air aloft. And the air, to get these storms to really rotate, you want that air to rise efficiently. So, and to really form at the surface, you want that air to rise efficiently. So that can't really happen when you've got colder air near the surface and warmer air aloft, because warm air does tend to rise. That is how the physics works. So, moving on from that, we've got our day 2 risk, the risk tomorrow. So this is kind of looking at CAPE, which is a parameter here that describes instability in the atmosphere. So this is kind of your juice for storms to initialize and, that rising motion to take place. We've got fairly low values of this CAPE parameter here. We would want to see values in the 1,000 or higher, but there are a couple caveats to that. It is currently, it is the winter months, and CAPE tends to be underdone on the winter months in general, and also tends to be more effective at lower values in the winter months. And also, this is the NAM 3-kilometer model, the North American model, and that also generally in the winter months has a bias towards lower instability, lower moisture, cooler temperatures overall. The NAM is probably underdoing this CAPE, so I wouldn't be surprised to see that uptrend a little bit as we go as this becomes a day 1 risk. Something I want to illustrate here is that this threat has a much higher tornado risk given, the better low-level thermals as well as this shear. And this is for the same hour off the North American model. I'm going to switch through these 3 frames. This is going to be 500 millibars. This is up at about 15,000 feet above the surface. And we're looking at the winds here. So you can see the winds are generally out of the south-southwest, or west-southwest rather, at 55 to 60 knots in this region. As you can see down here, these kinds of colors, 60, around in the 60s for speed. As I move down to the 700 millibar height, which is roughly about 10,000 feet, 5,000 feet lower, we've got winds coming a little more out of the south here. We've got a little bit of shear, directional, and also in speed shear, we've got values closer to 40 knots. In much of this region, in the same region where storms are going to be initializing. If I move down even further to 850, whoa, we got a big change here. We've got winds coming out of the south more, so strong directional shear and really only 20 knots. That is going to provide a lot of shear for storms to rotate pretty effectively, and I would watch out a little bit more for tornadoes on this day. Definitely with that strong trough moving through, we've got chance for straight line wind damage as well with these pretty intense mid and upper levels, if that can work down to the surface in any way. a very intense, potent system moving through, bringing lots of severe weather. Now, to take it to the overall risk, the day 4 risk is a little bit too far out to cover in depth, but it is worth mentioning. The overall risk here, as I push this along, we've got this trough moving through the west, plenty of rains over the region, specifically north of where the severe risk is. Some of that warm air advection rain north of the warm front. We get a little initial round here, and as I push it forward even more, we get that real low pressure to form as this trough starts to dig in, goes negative. We've got a lot of snow here falling in Texas, as you can see, and this is really all in the same area for several hours, so I can see snow piling up here. And speaking of that snow piling up, let's get to those totals. Now, this is a blend of models, so this is probably going to be underdoing the amounts a little bit. I would maybe double these amounts here, maybe even triple in some areas. So in that case, this is a very significant snow total coming out. But I use this model just to get a general idea of where that band of heavier snows are going to be. Specifically, Texas, the Texas Panhandle is going to be more favored. Some models run warmer and shouldn't be warmer, but I would say the colder models have a general better idea based on that process of dynamic cooling I described earlier. And so, we've got amounts of 2 to 4 to 5 to 6 inches here, and I would really double or triple those amounts. So we could be seeing from 6 to 12 inches in much of this region, and maybe even greater than a foot in some localized areas here. Best to keep that in mind. We've got winter storm watches out, so it's going to be a very interesting storm to watch. Fairly unusual for this area of the world, but not too uncommon, and it should be. It might impact some of the travel. This is going to be through Tuesday morning, so much of this is going to fall on Monday, perhaps a little bit into Sunday, particularly in the Texas Panhandle and in parts here of New Mexico and Colorado here. So I do want to push this forward a little bit. This is going to be on the American model. This is going to better idea looking a little further out. You see that corridor of heaviest snow move through southern Missouri on this model run, and out 72 hours is going to be a pretty good guess at where that snow is going to be. Even through the Northeast, there are going to be some pretty major shifts, and I do put caution on this, but we do get a strengthening storm as that trough in the upper levels goes a little bit negative. You could kind of see that here. The angle of this 540 line here, this dash blue line, that angle is a little bit tilted like this, and that is going to allow this low to really strengthen as it moves up the coast. And we get heavy snows as a result, and over a pretty widespread area, perhaps even covering some of the metropolitan areas of I-95, which have lacked in snow so far this season, especially for New York City and places north. So it should be an interesting one to watch for there too. Maybe perhaps a more widespread significant event than what we are going to be seeing in Texas and Oklahoma, as amounts here. Doing some model comparison, this kind of also shows an idea of how uncertain we are right now. But generally, we've got a widespread area of 8 to 12 inches, and these amounts are going to be maybe not quite correct, especially using a 10-to-1 ratio, but these amounts are pretty significantly high and definitely something to watch out for. The blend of models, again, this is going to be probably lower than what is best, but it does show that best corridor of heaviest snow, and that is what I'm getting at. And still some significant amounts from Philly, 2.5, New York City, 2.5, and Boston, especially here on the blend, wins out with 5 inches. But I do want to quickly mention the prospects of snow, something here called frontogenesis, which is just, think of it as all these purple contours when they're covering some of these blue contours. That is just going to be where your area of heaviest banding is going to be, and it's important to watch where that goes. We're right now in a range where this will start to become more important, but right now this is going to shift around. So it's just something interesting I wanted to bring up, as well. Right now that definitely favors the New York City area a little bit, perhaps Long Island through Connecticut, Rhode Island into Massachusetts, southern Massachusetts. and parts of New Jersey as well. You know, that's going to be the corridor of heaviest snow. So wherever this sets up is going to be our best snows in the Northeast. So we'll see where that happens. With that said, that is basically all the weather we've got going on here in the Northeast, rather in the entire U.S. here. Thank you so much for watching. I really hope you enjoyed. I hope you learned something. If you did, please drop a like down below. Comment if I can improve in any way possible, or if you did enjoy, share, as I'll continue to try to provide these updates pretty regular basis. We're going to try to get these out. So with that said, thank you so much for watching, and I'll talk to you later. Bye-bye.